Well, good morning. I hope it's a nice September day wherever you happen to be. This morning we'll be talking about a very serious subject, one that will affect all of us in some way. The conversation starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Now, here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, our subject this morning is Alzheimer's disease. It's very likely that all of us watching this discussion have a family member or a friend that has felt the impact of this disease. How do we recognize it? One that is ranked currently 6th as the leading cause of death in the United States. What are some of the warning signs we need to look for in ourselves and those close to us? Joining us this morning to discuss those questions and many more related to Alzheimer's, as well as other types of dementia and neurological issues, is Dr. Roman Politti. Dr. Politti received his medical degree from the University of Michigan Medical School and has been practicing neurology in Marquette for over 20 years. Dr. Politti, welcome to the Ryan Report.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Nice to have you back. We had a conversation like this once before.
Yes.
And I'm looking forward to it again. First of all, let's make sure we get the terminology right, the definitions right. As I understand it, Alzheimer's is not, well, let's put it this way, dementia is not always Alzheimer's, but Alzheimer's is always dementia.
Right.
What are the terms mean?
The terms are often used interchangeably, and it certainly can be confusing. In a general sense, dementia is the broadest category, and there can be many different types of dementia, like there can be many types of headache. Not all headaches are migraine. And within dementia, the one we usually focus on is Alzheimer's dementia, the most common. And as people age, their risk of dementia being due to Alzheimer's goes up significantly. So as, again, people get into their 70s and 80s, most dementia that we're talking about is Alzheimer's. So they start to be used interchangeably.
You know, to start with, there's kind of forgetfulness we all have.
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't necessarily mean we have Alzheimer's or even dementia, does it?
Right. There's quite a range of presentation. There's certainly within the normal, healthy brain, people are going to forget their keys here and there. They're going to forget where they parked the car, at some point. It's when memory starts becoming an ongoing issue, a recurring issue, and it's being noticed by the person and their family. That's the time when we're more interested. A single event, especially at a particular time of stress, we wouldn't put much weight on, but recurring difficulty when there's no other obvious explanation would be concerning for dementia.
On your example with the keys, losing the keys is one thing, forgetting what they're for is probably
right.
a better example of a problem.
And even that would be, by the time somebody had more difficulty remembering what keys are for, would generally be much more advanced in terms of dementia. So that wouldn't usually be a presenting symptom.
I have a feeling we need to make a couple of points here.
Okay.
First, so that people aren't not misled, but under the wrong impression. As we've just said, being forgetful is not necessarily a sign that someday we're going to have Alzheimer's. But isn't it important that if you have some symptoms, that they be evaluated?
Certainly. When somebody first starts having symptoms, we're going to recommend that they have some contact with their primary care provider to make sure that they don't have some other explanation first. Simple things to make sure somebody doesn't have a bladder infection, which can be a very common cause of confusion in an older person. Right. That they don't have some other medical condition that would be leading to memory difficulty that might be, hopefully reversible and treatable. Mm-hmm. Once their general provider has sort of tried to exclude some of those causes, and certainly if they have ongoing concerns for memory, then the next step would usually be evaluation with somebody more specialized in memory care.
And what kind of things would you do? How do you go through that process? How do you begin to identify if a person is just being forgetful or truly is on the path for
right.
something more serious?
There's several ways we evaluate it. The most important part to the neurologist is really trying to take that entire history. We really want to know how did it start, what other symptoms may be involved, and to get that part of the history fleshed out, it's very helpful to have a family member or certainly a close friend come to the visit with them. And make sure that the person, if they're coming by themselves, might not be able to give us the entire history or presentation. And then once we have a concern for memory, there are other testing we would do. Oftentimes we'll end up taking a picture of the brain, either a CAT scan picture or an MRI picture of the brain. And I always like to explain to people that that's not really to diagnose Alzheimer's. It's really to help us exclude many other things that can mimic or pose as Alzheimer's. So again, that we would treat very differently. There's very often that we'll do certain laboratory testing, blood tests or a urine test, to make sure, again, we're not missing a medical condition that's presenting as dementia. And then oftentimes we'll send people for more involved thinking testing, either with an occupational therapist or a neuropsychologist who has significant extra training. And we'll often spend a couple hours with the person really trying to see what skills their brain is still good at and what skills they're having more difficulty with, especially memory.
And as I understand it, Alzheimer's disease, although is somewhat treatable, it's not preventable at this point and it's not curable.
Right.
But some other dementias may be, and that's why it's important to
Yes.
identify what's really happening?
Yes. Very often the things that would be more involved with a medical condition that might be affecting the whole body can have presentation with symptoms involving the brain, and it's important to recognize that to make sure you're treating the underlying cause.
Is there kind of a self-denial that goes along with this for most people?
Certainly. I think there's self-denial for the person experiencing memory loss, and oftentimes there's denial of their family member, the spouse. The spouse doesn't want them to have memory loss, and it tends to come on very slowly, even over years. And very often the person will sort of take over tasks. They don't even realize consciously that they're doing it. They'll start to finish the person's sentences. They'll start to sort of cue them with the next word or the next activity without even really realizing that they're doing it. And so oftentimes when we bring people in for an evaluation, they actually may be a little more advanced in the dementia than you would think for somebody having a first visit, but the family member has really been covering and compensating for that memory loss or acting as a crutch for quite a while.
We'll follow up on that in just a minute. Back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. We're talking this morning with Dr. Roman Politti, a neurologist practicing in Marquette, talking primarily about Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Let's get back to the early diagnosis idea. And it sounds like from the conversation we were having just before we went away that in a lot of cases we're not really getting it very early, that people are compensating and
we see a variability in this. I would say overall, by the time people are getting to see me, it is earlier than it used to be, but I think we still have room to go. I think a lot of times people are often even 2 or 3 years really into the disease by the time I'm being involved, and we certainly would like to be involved as early as we can.
What, no, I know you have some medical treatments available. How effective are they?
They're limited. They're not a cure, and I usually try to be very clear with people. The current medications that we have available can help treat the symptoms. They can help with the memory, they can help with some of the function, but they're not a cure. So it's a condition that we expect will get slowly worse over time. So even with treatment, I warn people, I try to prepare them and their family. Year after year, I expect them to get a little worse, even with all the medications we currently have.
Do those medications slow the progress of the disease, or
they're not shown to do that. So they can help the person function better than they would without them. But right now, there's no evidence that they're truly affecting the disease process itself, the actual injury to the brain.
Have we seen any improvement in the medications that are available? We've been at this now for a number of years.
We have. We're about 20-some years into having medication that is shown to be helpful. We're really kind of on the edge of that next step of we certainly would love to have medication that helps us reverse the disease or prevent the disease, but we're not quite there yet.
I saw an article, and I think it was a Mayo Clinic article, that perhaps they want to look down a different track than they were looking at before, and this is going to get way too technical for me, and I'm sure for our audience, but as far as what the culprit is,
Right. In a simple sense, if people have heard of these terms called plaques and tangles, when you look at a piece of brain under the microscope, there's certain changes that we see in the brain structure and the nerve cell structure that are highly associated with dementia like Alzheimer's. And there's some controversy. It's a bit of a chicken and the egg question. Which causes the other? Do the things we see cause the dementia? Does the dementia cause these findings? And so there are several very large studies that are looking at ways to attack, especially the plaque part, something called amyloid. It's a sticky protein in the brain. Okay. And there's different ways that they're trying to keep that from forming, and can they reverse it? We just haven't found the answer for that yet.
Wouldn't that be the key to actually preventing or curing the disease?
Well, that's what we hope,
Yeah.
and that's the next
assume,
step.
I guess.
Yeah, you know, the goal eventually certainly would be to get to a stage of evaluation where we can assess people and really determine who's going to get dementia before they ever show symptoms, and then have some sort of intervention so that they never have symptoms. But again, we're quite a ways from that.
I think I also read somewhere, and this may be correct or not, but that perhaps this even starts much earlier than we even imagine.
I think the more we look into this and really try to look at even those subtle changes, it's much longer duration than we've previously attributed.
Is it accurate to say that as the disease progresses, it probably becomes more of an issue for the family than the individual?
I think it's a very fair statement. I think early on, I think people often have insight that they're slipping, that things are not quite right. When people really get to more of a moderate and certainly at a more advanced stage of dementia, they tend to lose that insight, that they forget that they have trouble with their memory. And it definitely becomes, in general, more of a stress on the family. The person themselves may not be as stressed by the impairment, but certainly the spouse and the children are going to be much more impacted.
What about the idea that if we actively use our brain, it can help forestall Alzheimer's or dementia?
There's a little controversy about this. Certainly, brain activities, brain games are not going to hurt the individual. One approach to this has been to say, well, if somebody gets really good at doing crossword puzzles and they're staying active, it may only be improving their ability to perform crossword puzzles. It doesn't necessarily mean that doing crossword puzzles will improve your memory and brain function as a whole. And that's where the controversy comes in. I think staying active, certainly staying socially engaged, is very important. I think that's been shown to be helpful. And lifestyle factors, eating a healthy diet, regular exercise, getting good sleep, just generally taking care of your overall health will certainly help delay and decrease your risk for dementia.
And you kind of touched on this, but other health-related issues can ultimately affect the brain as well.
Obesity, hypertension, really the things that give you risks for strokes and heart attacks are things that we know controlling those concerns, diabetes, smoking, will also help lower your overall risk for getting dementia.
Are we putting enough resources toward this, do you think, as a medical community?
There are certainly a lot of resources going in at the research level. This is a very large, patient population. The pharmaceutical companies certainly have a large incentive to try to come up with the next better mousetrap to treat this and cure this. But again, unfortunately, the science is a lot slower than we'd like it to be.
Okay. Got some more questions. We'll get to those in just a couple of minutes. Back with more on the Ryan Report after we take this break. We're talking this morning with Dr. Roman Paletti, a neurologist in Marquette. We've talked about Alzheimer's. What about other forms of dementia?
Yeah, that's certainly the most common one that we normally focus on. Classically, that's the person who's getting older, generally in their mid-60s or older, and your risk for dementia, Alzheimer's, certainly goes up in the 70s and even more in the 80s. But there are other causes. One other cause, especially in somebody who may have more medical conditions, is multiple strokes. You know, if you have multiple areas of injury to the brain, that can certainly begin to cause trouble with memory and thinking, dementia. There's something called Lewy body dementia, or dementia with Lewy bodies. And this is a condition that overlaps quite a bit with Parkinson's disease, where someone may or may not have the other symptoms of Parkinson's, but they tend to be slower, a little stiffer, and will often present at a somewhat younger age, and tends to be quite variable in the person's impairment from the dementia, especially early on. They may have very good days and very poor days for no particular reason, where Alzheimer's tends to be very consistent, you know, sort of slow marching in a worse direction. Lewy body dementia also very early will tend to have more of a psychiatric presentation. The person will often have more trouble with hallucinations and delusional thinking, that they may have some just really wrong beliefs that are really out of character for them. Those can often be early symptoms. Unfortunately, we don't have a cure for that condition either, but we do have medications that can help it. And another one is something called frontotemporal dementia. Again, this is a type of dementia that can affect at a younger age, often affects people, you know, certainly while they're still working, and tends to affect their judgment, really even more than memory. And that can be very concerning when somebody's presenting in their 40s or 50s, and that their judgment is difficult, their personality is changing, and that can actually be the presentation for dementia.
So in all of these cases, including Alzheimer's, let's try to bring it back home. And at what point does someone talk to their family doctor?
Yeah, I think certainly early on. Again, looking for things that would mimic a dementia, you know, somebody with memory impairment. Check to make sure their mood is correct, that they're not anxious or depressed or chronic insomnia. Make sure their overall medical health is good, that they're getting adequate sleep, that they don't have a sleep disorder. Something called sleep apnea can sometimes present in an earlier person as dementia. They'll actually present complaining of their memory when really they have a breathing, sleeping problem. But when it becomes more than just once or twice that someone's a little forgetful, you know, when family and friends are starting to notice, certainly that's time to get the primary care involved.
And I realize each individual is different, but with Alzheimer's, is there a kind of a normal progression timetable? Yeah,
that's fair. I would say, you know, kind of we alluded to earlier, you know, by the time we put a label on someone's impairment, likely they've had really a pathology, an injury to the brain, probably going on 5 or longer years. It takes quite an amount of injury before the person will start having actual symptoms of memory loss and dementia. From that time on, it's somewhere around 8 to 10 years is pretty typical. And again, dementia is going along with all the other impairments of older age. And so they're going to have all the other risks of heart attacks and strokes.
One thing we certainly want to mention, there's an Alzheimer's walk coming up in Marquette.
Yes.
There have been some around the UP. It's very important to get involved with these.
I think it's very helpful. It's certainly a good fundraiser for them, and also just getting awareness out.
And in Marquette, it's on September 26th.
Yes.
That's a Saturday coming up very soon. Also, we want to mention the fact that you are now with the Marquette Internal Medicine and Pediatric Associates.
Yes.
And if people want to contact you or have any questions, they can reach you at that practice. Thanks very much for coming in today. I know this is a subject that is very important to a lot of people, and hopefully we've answered the questions they may have, at least to get them on the right track to move forward.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Back with some additional thoughts on this morning's show after we take one more break. Well, recently I've been reminiscing about television, going back to when I started at TV6 50 years ago. Today, watching television requires little effort. Turn the set on and select the channel. But it wasn't always that easy. Watching TV took more effort back then. For example, those popular 21-inch black and white sets used to come with more buttons and knobs that were needed to correct problems that came up every day. The most common were the horizontal and vertical controls. I know some of you will remember those. Occasionally, the picture on your set would start to roll, and you had to adjust the vertical control to make it stop. There were other times when the picture would be slanted to the point where it became unwatchable. Making the right adjustments to the horizontal control would almost always solve the problem. By the early 1980s, the sets have been improved to the point where these controls were no longer necessary. One other device that has an interesting history is the TV remote control, which was first invented by the Zenith Radio Corporation about 60 years ago. It could turn a television set on and off and change channels, but there was a problem. It wasn't wireless. It was connected to the TV set by a cable that people kept tripping over. The company came up with the first wireless remote in 1955, but it also had some issues. They came up with a better one in 1956, which pretty much set the stage for quite a few years to come, but it was still far from perfect. As a result of all this, for a lot of people in the early days of TV, if you wanted to change channels, you got up out of your seat, walked over to the set, and turned the channel selector knob. I know for some of you that might be hard to envision, since sets today don't even include a channel selector knob. When it finally arrived, the modern TV remote had a major impact on TV watching. First of all, we all gained a few pounds because we didn't have to keep getting out of our seat to change channels. But the other thing it gave birth to was channel surfing. For those who don't recognize the term, it involved flipping through the channels one by one, stopping only momentarily on each one to determine what show was on. The problem was, if you didn't find anything you liked, your television viewing sometimes involved constant channel surfing, never watching an actual show, but just 10 to 15 second glimpses of every channel available. And when it got to the point that we had 30 to 40 channels, that could eat up a lot of time. One of the real problems with channel surfing in many homes was the fact that the person with the remote, usually the male in the family, and the person without the remote often didn't agree on this practice. It was very common to hear, "Will you stop changing the channel? Just pick out a show we can watch. What's the matter with you?" I don't know if it actually broke up any marriages, but I think it brought some to the breaking point. I'm not sure what happens in most households today, but I have to believe that channel surfing is also going to be only a memory very soon. When you have several hundred channels to choose from, flipping through them all is more like work than fun. And besides, you can find whatever you need right here on TV6. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Just about time to wrap it up for another week. I want to remind you again that our show is also available on the internet. Check it out at uppermichigansource.com. A click on the Features tab will take you where you need to be. And if you have some thoughts you want to share with us, drop us an email at theryanreport@chesstv.com. We appreciate having Dr. Roman Politi with us this morning to talk about Alzheimer's disease. It was helpful to get some insights from someone who knows and understands this major health concern. Today's show is coming up next. I hope you have a great day, and will plan to join us again next Sunday morning.